I wouldn't say the medievals had medicine, but they sure had ideas. And I really think if I didn't know what germs were and someone tells me I have to soak in the blood of a sinner or eat skull moss, I'd be like, alright, makes sense if dying from a minor cut is the alternative. But did any of these absurd remedies actually work? And arguably the more important question, why did people think that they worked? Before I answer that and give some context as to why for the longest time a random stone was considered peak medical science, a moment of silence for the Western Roman Empire. In the arms of an angel. Okay, after the collapse of the Roman Empire, medical advancement in Western Europe slowed down drastically. There are several things that led to this decline, but in my opinion, the saddest contributor was something way too simple: language. By the 6th century, almost no one in Western Europe knew Greek, so the valuable medical works of Hippocrates, Galen, Herophilus could not be translated or spread. There were Latin texts, but they were summaries, less analytical and more superstitious. Kind of like if the Greek texts were YouTube and what was available in Latin was YouTube Shorts. These works were thankfully preserved by the Byzantine Empire, where medicine wasn't just killing puppies and kittens, but it would take hundreds of years before the radical idea of clinical observation made its way back to the West. And how exactly? A minute of silence for the fall of Constantinople. Pieces of myself, got up in desperation. After the Ottomans invaded the capital, many Greek scholars fled to Italy, taking with them the medical manuscripts that had been lost for nearly 1,000 years. Guys, we have analytical medicine, not bound by superstition. I'm still gonna kill puppies. Why? Why? I have gout. You can say the Greeks invented the wheel in terms of medicine, and you'd think Western Europe just had to reinvent it. But no, instead they invented a square, wrote their favorite Bible verses on it, and called it a day. This will certainly do for the next 1,000 years. Hey, is that a rat? Another devastating blow to scientific advancement was the church. And it's not that the church suppressed science, it's just that no science was more important than theology. And that kind of eliminated Hippocrates' natural cause explanation for illnesses, because illness was seen as more of a spiritual trial. Of course, medicine still mostly revolved around the humor theory, which, to explain what humor theory is in the simplest way possible, sometimes when you're sick, you throw up and you feel better. I'm pretty sure Hippocrates turned this concept into a whole field of medicine. And although the church ruled everyday life, superstitions grew. Folk medicine competed with monastic medicine, and both sucked. Because you go to a monastery and they tell you you have a cough because you don't pray enough, and it's not a cough, it's the devil, and he's trying to control your body. Here's some sage. Or you go to some old guy in the village and he diagnoses you with classic witch's curse and tells you to eat a frog about it or something. I made that one up, but there were actually toad doctors who practiced medicinal folk magic, and their treatments involved putting a live toad inside a bag and hanging that bag around the neck of the patient. I would have so faked being sick as a child in the medieval ages just so I can get a frog bag. But yeah, monasteries I think were your go-to if you needed medical attention, because it's free, and as a potato-maxing surf cell, you probably wouldn't be able to afford a guild-trained professional. That being said, monks were very knowledgeable when it came to herbal remedies, since it was kind of their job to copy and preserve medical manuscripts. Monasteries were also exceptionally clean and usually next to a river. Oh wow, sanitation. The only problem? After the 12th century, the church forbade the clergy from performing surgical operations involving blood. So what do you do for your monthly phlebotomy appointments, or if you need a kidney stone removed? Well, I would like for you to look at this illustration of a medieval monk. What stands out? Yep, the tonsure was the taper fade of the church, and the tradesmen often invited to monasteries to not only cut hair, but assist with medical procedures, were barbers, or more accurately, barber surgeons. That's right, the guy that cuts your hair also does surgery, dental work, and hole and scout to release bad spirits. But shit, the amount of times I'm walking out of the hairdresser shop beyond recognition really makes me think about the 13th century barber surgeon. Bro could set your arm backwards and ask you, "Is this okay? Do you like it? I like it." And you just gotta give him a teary backwards thumbs up and tip them 1/5 of a florin. All jokes aside, surgery was considered a trade. It wasn't something that universities taught for a really long time. But even when surgeons and barber surgeons split, the barbers were considered more skilled. In fact, they were the ones sent to battlefields to treat soldiers. But ultimately, neither rope surgeons or barber surgeons sanitized their tools, and all you get in terms of anesthesia is an opium rag or maybe something to bite down on. Doubt they gave out lollipops either. Oh, also, you might be quite unlucky depending on what month it is. Astrology and astronomy were taught as part of medicine because of the belief that the body mirrors the cosmos. That's why rope surgeons of the time referred to the zodiac man, a chart which links body parts with zodiac signs. And surgery on a body part was considered unsafe if the moon was in the sign associated with it. And I find this really funny because medieval doctors could tell you, sorry, but your penis is in lizard, you see, and it's December, so there's nothing we can do. But hey, not to worry. There's a workaround thanks to which you can avoid surgery altogether. Let me tell you about the distant cures which really gained popularity during the 16th and 17th century, because of course alchemy also had its place in medicine. I'm talking about weapon salve and powder of sympathy, a remedy which you rub not on the wound, but on the weapon that caused the wound, and a powder which you rub not on the wound, but on the bloody bandages, which is like getting cancer and you gotta sit down and watch doctors do chemo on a pack of Dunhill. But this brutal treatment was likely based on the story of Telephus, who was injured by Achilles' spear and could only be healed by applying rust from the spear to the wound. Another popular sympathetic magic remedy was moss from a skull, a very expensive, highly sought after corpse medicine. You might be familiar with corpse medicine because every stick tuber on the planet has that in a Crazy Things Medieval Europe Top 10 you wouldn't believe list. But skull moss was like the creme de la creme of corpse cures, right up there with mumia. The best skull moss, of course, came from the skulls of people who died violent, premature deaths. Why was this believable? Well, like all corpse medicine, it was thought that the remains of the dead could transfer the remnants of their vital force to the living. It also helps that certain types of moss are actually pretty good at stopping a wound from bleeding. They're not only more absorbent than cotton, but they're also natural antiseptics. All that being said, it doesn't need to be from a skull no matter how cool and gnarly that is. Also, there's no benefit to ingesting it. As I said, it was quite expensive to get skull moss, but if you didn't have any on hand, blood of a criminal works just fine. There is nothing more hardcore than holding your sick baby up so it can get sprayed by the blood of a man who is being beheaded. Because that's not blood. It's pure life force and it doesn't get any fresher. But unlike skull moss, no health benefits, and the man probably had syphilis. It's statistically improbable for that kid to survive anyways, especially after an STD blood shower. But hey, if it does survive, that's a really cool story to tell later. Now finally, let's talk over the counter. Because the final group of remedies we'll be going over, I like to call just some bullshit found on the ground. Stones in medieval medicine are pretty straightforward. For example, this one looks like blood, so it will help with blood loss. This one looks like smallpox, so it will work on smallpox. And this one looks like a snake, so it can cure snake. Let me tell you about snake stones, which remained popular right up until the 20th century. So how did someone discover fossilized ammonite and say, this is aspirin? Well, fossils are pretty advanced stuff, especially for people who believe Earth is 1,000 years old and this is as close to one can get to an elephant. That's probably why ammonites were believed to be coiled snakes turned to stone by saints. And because they're the product of saintly powers, they should have magical medicinal properties. Like, dude, come on. It's a snake that Saint Hilda turned to stone. It's gotta do something. It also didn't help that nefarious vendors actually carved snake heads onto them and told buyers they can be used to tell the future. But you gotta think. Didn't the snake make it so your main waifu had to leave heaven? Shouldn't they be like, not trusted? Other at-home cures worth mentioning are the Bear Grylls Special, which was like the most popular juice detox of the time, but the juice is your own juice. Also cow poop to draw out poison and infection, aka speed running tetanus for no good reason. Here is also worth mentioning that the people of the time believed that pus is actually needed for a wound to heal. Then there's also eating worms for an upset tummy, counterintuitive at best. Smoking herbs in your mouth to get rid of tooth worms, which isn't a real thing, that's just what people thought the toothache is. And I think I understand more and more why kings often had their doctors executed. If I had to eat poop from a butt and still have the sniffles, I'd guillotine a bitch too. Of course, don't get me wrong, these people laid the foundations for the Industrial Revolution. The things being done with steel were impressive, agriculture was popping off, and it really makes you think, wow, you made this but couldn't figure out that you gotta wash your hands before touching open wounds? Things picked up a little after the church lost most of its influence, dissection was no longer forbidden, proper schools were established, but no placebo is this good. You would not have survived a medieval doctor. You would have left far worse off in most cases. But with a pretty reasonable explanation as to why you gotta find a cat, kill it, and roast it, and then drink its juices, just for a minor cough. Now, write down in the comments what pre-modern Euro medicine you've been fascinated by recently. By gamer subs, please? And I think that's about it. Okay, bye.